So, in just a few months, on July 4th, 2026, it is going to be the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And here's what most people don't realize as they're talking about the 250th birthday of America, which is that the story of America isn't really just about what happened in history, it's about all of us. And I've been thinking a lot about this as it relates to our family history and the millions of stories that made America. And so the question that I have for you today is, will your family story be part of this historic celebration? 250 years is a really big deal. Now, I remember the 200th anniversary of America. We celebrated it in 1976. I was not very old. I have very vague memories. They're kind of like that fuzziness that happens when you think back to your youth. But my family, for whatever reason, decided to celebrate the 4th of July that year at Disneyland. It was insane. The park reached capacity and they quit letting people in. That's how busy it was. I was 3 years old. Let's see. Nope. Yeah, I was 4 years old that summer, maybe three. And my brother and sister, who are twins, were not even a year old yet. And yet my parents, with a double stroller and all the confidence of young adulthood, marched us into the park to spend the day. Now, Disneyland is a big part of our family culture and family story. Having grown up in Southern California, both my parents grew up there as well. But the fact that we celebrated that day there is kind of crazy. My mother had made for us that year matching red, white, and blue clothing. And I'll have to share in my Instagram stories today a little bit about that picture that she took of us in those matching outfits. but that is my memory of the bicentennial. Now, what I didn't know at the time was how important a study of American history would become to me, both as part of my career and as part of my passion as a genealogist, and how important understanding that celebration would be to my family history. And you may not know either. So let me tell you a little story. In 1876, at the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the United States government asked every county in the United States to write a county history. They asked them to include information about the founding settlers of that community, about the original churches and schools and hospitals and important historic milestones that happened in that community. And then a lot of the counties that wrote these books, they included biographies of the founders and prominent people in that community. Now, a lot of counties actually did it, but some of them, it took them years, right? So the request came as part of the centennial in 1876, but some of those books weren't published until the 1920s or 1930s. Then in 1976, at that bicentennial that I spent at Disneyland, the government again asked the counties to create county histories. And so there was a flurry of some additional counties that hadn't participated the first time that completed the request. And there were some counties who had participated the first time who updated their volumes and published a volume 2 or revised publication of their original volume. And so those, excuse me, those local and county histories became a really important foundation for a lot of us who got into family history in the 1970s and 1980s and even into the 1990s. Those books provided a window into what was happening in those communities at that time and the recollections from the previous century since the founding of our country. And they became important genealogical bridges to information that we might not have had access to otherwise. One of those foundational county histories that was originally published because of that 1876 request is the only record I have found anywhere, and I have done a lot of searching, of the county in Ireland where my three times great grandfather is from. Those county and local histories provided that information because one of his grandsons had moved to Iowa, and the county in Iowa had published biographies of the founding community and prominent community members. And this grandson, who I'm not even related to, he's a first cousin of my great great grandfather. Nope, he's a first cousin of my great grandfather. And I don't know him, I don't know his family, but he had had a biography written up. And what it had talked about was where his father had come from and then where his grandfather had come from. And it lists the county in Ireland. And again, it's the only thing I've ever found. Every record I've found for George Cowan lists that he was just born in Ireland. But this one recollection from an interview with a grandson and then published in one of these county and local histories became the one clue I have at this point for where in Ireland George was from. And if you've ever tried to do Irish research, you know that knowing exactly where they're from is the key to success. So, those county and local histories have been published for almost all of them on Ancestry for decades. I've been a customer since the late 1990s. Ancestry only went online in 1996, and so I'm pretty sure they've been on since pretty close to the beginning. One of the things you might not know, though, is how to find them. So I thought what I would do today is share that with you and then talk a little bit more about how in this 250th anniversary year of America, you might be able to share, discover, and share your own stories. Okay, so let me share my screen really quickly so that I can show you exactly where to go to find. Dun, dun, dun. I always have to pause for a minute and make sure you're seeing my screen. Fantastic. Okay, so my favorite feature on the entire Ancestry website, I know it makes me such a nerd, but here you go. It's the card catalog. If you click on search, and then you'll find the card catalog here in that menu. When you click on the card catalog, that's going to take you to a listing of every single individual database of records available on Ancestry. As you can see here, there's over 33,000 of them. Those individual databases sometimes are massive. I think our largest database of actual records, so we do have people's trees, but records is over 1.8 billion records in one database. And then we have some databases that just have a few hundred people in them. That's records usually typically equate to a person. Well, Ancestry has digitized these county and local history books that were published, and each of them is typically a single database, though we are looking currently at ways to aggregate that information so that it makes it a little bit more hintable and searchable and findable. We also have recently implemented the ability for some people to do full text search. It's a brand new feature on Ancestry that's just starting to roll out. Some of you may already have seen it, but basically what it is it's searching those kinds of books to find the information that you are looking for. Those books were originally indexed using really old, decades ago old OCR technology, which is where a computer reads a page. It's kind of some of the precursors to some of the things that AI is doing now. And so they're a little bit clunky. The search isn't always clean. It doesn't always find the right information. Sometimes the information is a little bit buried. And so many of those volumes are going to, if they haven't already, come into the full text search feature. But here in the card catalog, what you can do is you can filter to find these particular county history books. Over here, under the filter section at the very bottom, there's a category called stories, memories, and histories. And then you're going to look for social and place histories. And what you'll see then is the ability to filter by a specific location. Now, today we're talking about the US, but if your family is somewhere in Europe or in Canada or Australia or elsewhere, you can filter by that location as well to see what books have been published. And then here, once you get here, you can then filter additionally down to a particular state or let's see, I'm going to go to see if we can find that book, Iowa. And you can see, here are the books or the individual databases that are these local histories for Iowa. And then you can filter down to a specific county if you want to see if you can find that particular county history. And so let's see, Woodbury County is the county where my family was from, and here is that book, Woodbury County History in Iowa. You can see this particular book was published originally in 1942, and it was published on Ancestry in 2004. So anytime you get to a specific book or database in this case, you can look at the source information and we'll show you exactly when and where that book was published. And then you can search the book, but remember, if it hasn't been updated, this is still using the old OCR technology. And so the key to searching these successfully is less is more. Try just putting in a surname and marking it exact and doing a search that way instead of filling out all of the information on the form. And that will help you determine if the surname you're looking for is found in the book at all. And you just kind of rotate through them like that. Okay. So kind of keep that in mind as you're doing, if you want to search these. What I like to do, which I think is even more interesting, is I like to just open up the book and it'll open up in an image browser, just like all images on Ancestry that you view. And then I like to work my way through one page at a time, just like I was reading the book. And you can do that on your screen. And so it'll give you like all the details about why the book was created and information about the county and the founding of the county and all sorts of great information. Here's the key. When you are coming to know your ancestors, a lot of us just fill in names and dates and places on a pedigree chart. But in this year of celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Ancestry has chosen a theme of the story of us. And so what you will hear from us all year long is us basically giving you a charge to go out and find your own stories and then share those stories. Much like these original counties back in 1876 were asked to create county histories, and then that invitation was issued again in 1976 to create county histories. Here in 2026, I am giving you a personal invitation to create your own family stories. So I hope you'll join with us this year in creating those stories. And what I would like to do with the remainder of our time together today is give you some tips for how you can create those stories for your own family. And more importantly, how you can find them to begin with. So I'm going to show you how to discover some stories, and then we're going to walk through a couple of ways to share those stories. Now, you have to decide whether you want to start at the beginning or start at the end. Here's what I mean by that. When you build a family tree, you typically start with yourself and work your way back one generation at a time. And each time you go back a generation, sometimes you go out. Like I put in my parents in my family tree, then I add my brothers and sisters and their spouses and kids. And then I put in my grandparents, and I put in my mom and dad's brothers and sisters and their spouses and their kids and grandkids. And then I go back, right? Every time you go back a generation, you have the opportunity to also come forward a generation. And that is my personal favorite way of building a family tree. It allows me, while I'm building my family tree, to work with my DNA results and find those cousins who've taken DNA tests and make sure I understand where they fit in the family tree. It also ensures that each time I go back a generation, I've got a solid foundation that I'm working from, lots of familial information to make sure I'm identifying the right people, and it tells the full family story. And that's the thing that I think sometimes when we get started in family history, we miss is the story of it all. Because we're sometimes so focused on finding the next person in their tree that we forget that those people lived in communities and in families, and they migrated together and they worked together and they worshiped together. And so when we understand the entire family, we have a clearer picture into their story. When we understand the community that they are living life with, we understand more of the story. And so I spend a lot of time as I'm building my family tree, making sure I'm including entire families and then doing things like going and looking for those county histories so that I can understand the community better. Now, it's a bonus when it gives me important clues and details to fill in on my family tree as well, but just immersing myself in that place becomes an important part of discovering story. So if you're taking notes, here is the first thing that I want you to remember when it comes to finding stories in your family tree. And that is this, that place is a character in the story. So often we forget about the effect that the places where our ancestors lived and the time in which they lived in that place really dictated a lot of their values, a lot of their community experiences and life experiences, what was available to them, what wasn't available to them. And so understanding that place in that time becomes an important part of the story. So look for those local histories in Ancestry or elsewhere. Dig into maps. That's another thing that you can find in the card catalog on Ancestry and see if you can't make those discoveries. So that's how I like to do it. I like to go back one generation at a time, make sure I go wide and deep every time I go back another generation. Now, once your tree gets pretty big, it's really easy to just like focus on one line or chase leaves. I do it still, but I also like to set some goals for myself about specific things I want to discover or uncover in my family tree. And since we're here at the start of a new year, I thought this would also be a perfect opportunity to just share with you some of my personal family history goals in the hopes that it might inspire you about some goals that you could create for yourself. Now, if you have a family history goal already, like some real reason you are here on Ancestry working on something specific, maybe you're trying to identify your biological parents, or maybe you're trying to locate what happened to a lost great grandmother, or maybe you've got a brick wall, probably Irish, somewhere in your family tree from the 1840s or 1850s. Or maybe you're trying to uncover your Revolutionary War ancestors. Whatever it is, if you've got a family history goal already, if you're watching this live, I would love if you would share that in the chat so that we can all kind of see what each other's goals are. If you're watching this on YouTube, of course, please share in the comments what your family history goal is. And then after I share mine, if you come up with one or come up with a new one, please share that as well. So here are my current family history goals. And I'm actually going to share my screen so that you can see my tree so that you can understand exactly where it is in my family tree that I'm working on these particular things. So we're going to close these and go right back here to my tree. So I have a long-standing goal in my family tree that I just keep picking at, and that is a very prominent, very immediate to me brick wall. And that brick wall is right here at John O'Brien. John O'Brien is my great-great-grandfather, one of them on my mother's side. He was born in 1841 or 1837 or 1832 or 1843, depending on which record you believe of his. And he was born in either Ohio or Iowa or Ireland, depending on which record or story you believe. Now, I've put a date and a birth location in my tree for him because I've taken all the records I've found for him, and it's a lot, and I've kind of come to the best conclusion that I feel is the most accurate information of the moment. But I have no idea who his parents are, and I have no idea if he was born in Ohio, where in Ohio. I suspect he may have been born in Ireland, and there is starting to emerge some new DNA evidence that might suggest the same. But right now, he's my brick wall. He's been my brick wall for a very, very, very long time. And so he is always on my list of goals. Here's the next thing I can do to start to break down this particular brick wall. Now, I have one other brick wall in my family tree, and I've put this one on the shelf for a while, but this is my from Ireland, and now I know the county down, 3 times great-grandfather on my father's side. I actually haven't worked on this particular brick wall for a while, and now enough of my dad's family has DNA tested that I've got some matches that I can work with and some things I can start discovering. And I have a suspicion of who his parents in County Down might be. And so I'm going to work on that and not just figuring out who his parents are, but also once I can definitively connect him to County Down through those potential parents, I want to learn all I can about that place. So those are my 2 brick wall goals for the year. And then I always also do a descendancy project. And so I pick a particular couple in my family tree and I work on identifying all of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and come right down to those living 4th and 5th and 6th cousins and use my DNA match list to see if I can find any of them in there that have already tested that can then help me find more of them that have tested so that I can shore up the genetic connections to these ancestors and in the process, learn all I can about them. So that is my current descendancy project. Like I said, I usually have 3 or 4 family history goals every year. Sometimes when I sit down to work on my family tree, I just let it take me wherever, right? I love a good rabbit hole as much as anybody else. But having goals also means that when I sit down and I'm not quite sure what I want to work on, I just pluck one of those and that's where I focus. So those 3 goals are the 3 that I probably would have done regardless of what year it is. But this year, because of 2026 being the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I have added a 4th goal. And this 4th goal is something that if you have ancestors here in the United States, might be interested in participating in as well. And my goal has been to identify all of my ancestors who either had military or patriotic service offered during the Revolutionary War. So here's what I mean by that. You might have an ancestor, typically a male, who served in a militia or some kind of military unit during the Revolutionary War. And that is a person who offered military service. However, during the Revolutionary War, because it took place here in America, in our places where our families were living, there were other people who offered what was called patriotic service, meaning They provided provisions, they provided money, they provided service in some fashion. Maybe they let troops sleep in their barns or their homes. Like they provided some kind of patriotic service to support the cause of the Revolutionary War. And so that is the two ways in which you might qualify to be a daughter or son of the American Revolution is if you have an ancestor. Remember, ancestors are anybody with the word parent in their relationship to you. So a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, a great-great-grandparent, and so on, right? You have lots of relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins of varying degrees, but ancestors are the people that you descend from. So people with the word parent in their relationship to you. So if you have an ancestor who gave patriotic service or served in the military during the Revolutionary War, you could qualify to be a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution or the Sons of the American Revolution. And I joined the DAR over a decade ago now through one of my ancestors who nobody had ever documented his service and submitted it to the DAR. But since then, I have identified other ancestors who also served, some whose work is documented and a couple whose work isn't. And so I've thought about possibly submitting an additional, it's called a supplemental to the DAR about that particular ancestor's service. I also have entire families who contributed to the cause. So in identifying my ancestors, and because I do my family history research wide and deep, not just back, I have been able to start to see patterns that lead to stories about the service that many of these people offered. So my fourth goal for the year is to understand the story of how the Revolutionary War affected my ancestors who offered patriotic service or served in the military. So the first thing that I did in order to reach this goal this year was I wanted to make sure I had identified who in my family tree had served in either fashion. The first thing you need to do is understand when the war took place and where your family was living at the time. And then I just went through my tree to see, was anybody here at the time or alive? Now I've got people in my tree who are immigrants, and anytime I've got an immigrant in my tree, I've just dropped a little ship emoji into the suffix field of their name. That way my tree starts to become a little bit of a story as well, right? So I can see here that these people were immigrants. This person was living here in the United States, born in the US at the time that the war was going on, but too young to serve. So you also have to keep in mind age groups. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. Sorry about that. That was coming whether I wanted it to or not. And this guy, I know he was born outside of the United States, but immigrated to the United States. And so I need to understand when he immigrated to know if he was here in time to have possibly served, because it wasn't just citizens who served, even people who were recent immigrants also served. And so that's what did was I just went through my tree one generation at a time, looking for who was in the right place at the right time. And then I went and searched Revolutionary War records on Ancestry, which we have. And then I also searched on Fold 3. They have Revolutionary War records. And then I went to the Daughters of the American Revolution website and searched to see if anybody had submitted that particular ancestor for patriotic service. So they had a record of what service they performed. So Ancestry, Fold 3, and the Daughters of the American Revolution website. Those were the three websites that I primarily focused on for this little first part of this exercise. Now, there may be other places I search and other records I look for to see if other members of my family also served or to understand more about their service, but that was where I started. Once I identified whether or not they had served, I added a tag to each of those people. So when you come in here to search all the people, you find all the people in your tree, you have a filters option. And one of those filters, and everybody has access to this filter, whether you have an Ancestry subscription or not, you can find my tree tags. So tree tags are a way to tag people in your tree with any kind of, let's see, here we go, any kind of preformed tag that Ancestry provides. So for example, for the individuals who served in the military, I tagged them with military service. For those who also served in the Revolutionary War, I tagged them as a Revolutionary War patriot, which is a tag that I created. It's a custom tag. And so I can come in here and I can check that box in my Find in Tree filter, and I can click Apply. And what this will show me is that there are 26 individuals in my tree that I have tagged with that Revolutionary War Patriot tag. And so here is the list then, and I can go through it page by page of all of my ancestors, right? Remember, anybody with the word father that served in the Revolutionary War. If I come here to his profile page, you will see I have tagged him as a Revolutionary War patriot. I have not tagged him with that military service tag because he didn't serve in the military. He offered patriotic service. And so that is my indication that I need to go dig into the story a little bit and see exactly what service he offered. Now, I've also included, so these are things you can do as you're starting to collect all the little pieces of the stories about your ancestors. My tree tags are a great way to tag things in your tree that you want, pieces of story that you want to keep track of so that you can quickly find them again. I also will enter notes. So every person in your tree, you can add notes. Now, here's what you need to know about notes, which is that notes are private. So even if your tree is public, my tree is public. Any one of you could go right now and search for Abraham Kuykendall, born about 1719, before 1719. That's the date that he was christened. And so I put that he was born before that date, right? Born in New York, died in 1812 in North Carolina. You could go search for him. You could find my tree because my tree is public on Ancestry, which means anybody with an Ancestry subscription at any level can find the dead people in my tree. Living people are privatized, and you do have to have some Ancestry subscription to access family trees. So my tree is public. You could come see my tree. You could see everything about Abraham except the notes, because the notes are private. So this is where I keep my research as I'm kind of doing it, as it's in process. Little pieces of information I want to keep track of. It just gives me this private little workspace. It's a great way to start to collect the story before you're ready to share the story. And in this case, I'm not ready to share the story. So what I've found so far about him is that he served in North Carolina. He offered civil service and patriotic service. And then I can go through and see these are the sources that the Daughters of the American Revolution, that's the sources where they got that information. So I can go look up any of these original records or publications to get additional information. He was a member of the militia, particularly the Committee of Safety, and then he served as a Justice of the Peace. And so I have this basic information about him that allows me to go and do additional research about his service and his experience in the Revolutionary War. Interestingly enough, this particular ancestor also has a DAR chapter named after him. So I suspect there is a lot of research already out there and stories that have already been told about him. And so in some cases, it's just a matter of collecting the stories and then putting them into a format that we want to share with our family members. So that is That is some of the tools on Ancestry that I am currently using to keep track of the pieces of the story as I find them. And that is my fourth goal this year for family history, which is identify all of my ancestors who gave Revolutionary War service and then dig into a few of them to see if I can't understand more about the story and how their service affected them and affected their family. Um, and so again, if you are watching this live or on YouTube, either one, comment in the chat or the comments about what family history goals you might have for this year, 2026. In January, when this is being recorded, it's a great time to start some of those family history discoveries. Now, a reminder that history isn't just dates and events. History is what happened to your people, what happened to my people, our ancestors who lived through all of these moments and had these full, rich, sometimes very interesting, sometimes very ordinary lives. But as we dig into them, we start to understand them a little bit better. So we talked about my first tip, which was to finding stories, which was to understand more about the place that your ancestors lived in the time that they lived there. Use those county and local histories, use those maps, dig into any other opportunities like county archives, state archives. They're going to also have information about the places and the communities within their borders. Okay, so tip number 2 is I want you to start to think about who is the main character in the stories that you're going to share. Now, in the case of Abraham, I suspect he is going to be the main character of that particular story when I collect it and start to tell it. One of the things that unfortunately happens sometimes is when we want to start to tell stories is we make ourselves the main character. Well, first I searched for this and then I found out this about this person, right? Like it's about our journey of discovery rather than about the story of what happened to that person or what their life experience was. And so I would challenge you is that as you're looking for the stories, you also start thinking about how I would tell this story and make that person the main character of that story. That I think is a really important thing to think about. And if you think about it as you go, it changes the way that you start to put those stories together. For me, building a family tree isn't just about the discoveries that I make, though it's super fun, or putting together the pieces that work my brain as I'm working on the puzzle that is figuring out exactly who goes where in my family tree and what their information was and what their story was. But it's also about then making sure that I share that story because that helps me connect more with my living family members. It also helps me make sure that this information gets passed on, that it gets incorporated into the lives of the children and siblings in my life. Now, I am the world's greatest aunt. Don't tell my sister. And I have 7 nibblings, 6 nieces, 6 nephews, and the world's only niece. And I love sharing family stories with them. But what I have found is that the story has to be interesting or they're not interested. And the fastest way to make the story not interesting is to make it all about me. But if I can also make it about them, then they're interested. And sometimes making it about them means figuring out ways to connect the story to the person that I'm telling them about. So maybe it's about somebody that's the same age as them, or somebody that was going through something similar to what they're going through. Or maybe it's just a sensational story. So, tip number 3, as you're thinking about all the things that you want to share, I want you to think about how you would hook somebody that you wanted to tell the story to. Now, here's what I mean by a hook. A hook is simply a line or a sentence or two that is so compelling that you could stop right there and somebody would ask you to tell them the rest of the story. If you can't do that, most people, especially children, but you know what, even my 40-something-year-old siblings, are not going to be interested. I know as a genealogist, one of my favorite things to do is to share stories. But if I don't share them in a way that hooks them right from the beginning, they're rolling their eyes or they're tuning me out because she's just talking about family history again. If I make it about myself instead of about the main character and how it connects to them, they're typically not going to be interested. But when I can do that, when I can find the hook, when I can tell the story about the main character, when I can connect it to them, then they're all in. And oftentimes they will come back to me then asking for more information. So, again, tip number 3 is, can you create a strong hook for your story? And an example of a strong hook is, again, something that will, if you stopped talking, have them asking you to tell them more. Here's an example, not from the Revolutionary War. I probably should have done that, but the stories of us are all about all the stories, not just from way back then, but everything that's happened since then as well. So here's the hook. A man walks into a police station in Southern California, and he has no idea who he is. Hours later, another man comes in with a newspaper clipping from an Oklahoma paper claiming this man is from there, and this has happened not once, but twice before. Are you at least a little bit interested? Right? Like, do you want to know what's happening? Why does this man have amnesia? How did he get from Oklahoma to California? I want to know more about that story. Now, there are lots of different ways you can tell and share those stories, but when you're writing or when you're telling a story, getting a good hook is going to be the way to have people asking you to tell them more. So, as we commemorate again the 250th, I keep saying 150th, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Ancestry will be celebrating over the next several months the stories of us. And we want you to be a part of this. We want you to bring your stories and find them and find ways to share them. So, you're going to start digging into the records about the person's life. You're going to come up with a way to tag people in your tree and to use the notes to keep track of what you're discovering. So you're going to attach records as you find them. You're going to write notes as you discover things in other places. You're going to start to kind of synthesize that information. And if you can, as you go, you're going to think about who's the main character of the story. Who do I want to tell it to? So how can I connect the dots? And then what can I do to hook them into this story? There are a couple of other places you can go to find stories, and there are a couple of other ways you can share stories. And so we're going to spend the last few minutes here, and I'm just going to share with you a few of those things. So let me share my screen again. And as I am doing that, right, so for me, my 4th goal this year, to find all the Revolutionary War people who offered Revolutionary War service in my tree, make sure that they're tagged, and then dig into 2 or 3 of the stories of that service. So the question then becomes, where do I go to find the story? Well, stories are found in the records, but they're found by putting all of the records together and then understanding what was happening in that time and place. So, reading those county histories is going to be a great first step. In this case, I know that Abraham was born, or at least christened, in Orange County, New York. So, I can go and dig into Orange County, New York. I also know that he died in Buncombe County, North Carolina. So I can go and look and see if there is a county history from Buncombe County, North Carolina. But the story has to fill in the gaps of just dates on a timeline. So here's a little exercise that I like to do when I am looking for stories, which is I brainstorm a list of questions. If I could know everything there was to know about this man and his wife and children and their family and their experiences, what is it that I would want to know? And I just brainstorm questions. I can think of a few for Abraham right off the top of my head, even though I haven't started this particular project yet. You're going to watch me start it in real time. How did he get from New York to North Carolina? When did that happen? Did he go with his parents? Did any of his siblings go? Did he go after he was an adult? So, as I follow the timeline, I'm going to be looking for when and where was he married? When and where were each of his children born? When and where did he ever purchase property, or did he offer military service or community service? Can I create a timeline out of his life that shows a migration pattern and a time when that occurred? And then can I look around him and see who else? Who else in his family or his previous community came with him from New York to North Carolina? Were there other stops he made along the way? Did his family migrate directly from New York to North Carolina, or did they stop in New Jersey along the way? Or did they go to Pennsylvania for a while, or down into Virginia first? Like, what was that path of getting him from where he started to where he ended up? Then I can start to look at things like, oh, wow, he was born in 1719 and he died in 1812. That's a really long life. If I scroll down the timeline here, this says he was 92 years old when he died. Oh, and I've got another spouse here. He was 85 years old when he married that spouse, only 26 when he married his first spouse, but I don't have an exact marriage date yet. So what else could I find about when and where this event took place? And how old was she? She's much younger than him. In fact, she's much younger. Well, no, she's not younger than some of his children. That's good. Okay. But I can start to look for other connections or other ways in which I can fill in the gaps, because filling in the gaps is where I'm going to find the pieces of the story. It's also going to help me know where to look, because he could be born in Orange County, New York, and died in Buncombe County, North Carolina, but he could have only lived in each of those places for a few months. He may have lived an entire life in between that in a completely other place. And that's why just filling in the names and dates and places on a pedigree chart with the births and deaths and even the marriages doesn't tell the whole story. So when you really dig in and get to know a person, you want to make sure you brainstorm as many questions as possible. If I was going to write an epic screenplay about this person's life, what would I need to know first? And that brainstorm of list of questions is just going to get the juices flowing. And then you can go back and start to fill in those gaps with some of that research. Well, that means you need to know where to find that information. So I've got my list of questions about Abraham. I then need to know what records are going to exist in those times and places that are going to help me fill in those gaps. And that brings us back to the card catalog. Again, the card catalog is one of my favorite resources because it just helps me know what records exist on Ancestry and gives me an idea of other places that I could look. So again, I could filter by a specific location. So I can come down here and I can filter down to US, and then I can filter down to New York, and then I could filter down to Orange County, and there are 79 databases on Ancestry specific to that. And so I could start going through some of those. I could also filter down to just the US, and then I could do it by time period. I know when Abraham was born, 1719. So I could say, show me about the 1720s, what kinds of records existed, or the 1790s, what kinds of records existed. So I could do it by century or by decade and just explore all of the many different kinds of records that might spark your imagination about how to answer those questions. So you've got your brainstormed list of questions. Now you've got a list of different kinds of records that you could go look at, and then you can dive in and start researching them. So that's one way to explore the card catalog to help you flesh out the story of the life of one of these people. There are other resources available as well that I use. I mentioned state archives, county historical societies, the wiki on Family Search. Family Search's wiki is fantastic for digging into a place and knowing what records might exist elsewhere and where those records might exist, online or a lot of times offline. I might call or email the librarian in the local community where my ancestor lived and ask what resources they have for local history in their library. And a lot of times those amazing librarians will sometimes go do the research for you, but at the very least they'll contact you with information about what they have accessible in their facility that's not available online. So lots of different ways you can dive into that. My favorite resource outside of digging through the card catalog is newspapers. So I often go to newspapers.com and I will type in not just the names of people, but I will also just browse to a local newspaper that was published in the community at the time my family lived there and see what's happening in the community. Because when you understand things like what churches are in that community, what are the politics of the community like, who's in public service, what are the occupations or the primary industries in that community. Like anytime you can understand more about it, your mind will start to fill in the pieces of what might have happened in the life of your ancestor. And then that will give you more ideas about places you can go dig into those stories. So brainstorm a list of questions you want to answer about this person. Then go look and see in the card catalog, on the Family Search Wiki, at the state archives, go see what records exist online and offline that will help you answer those questions. And then as you do that, keep notes to yourself about ways that this story starts to come together. And what you'll find is you'll often have additional questions come up that you can add back to your first list, and you can keep going through that process. That is how I put together the stories of the lives of some of my ancestors. And that's what I'm hoping to do this year in commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence for these particular Revolutionary War ancestors. Now, the next question, of course, is once you find those stories, if notes are private, and this is my workspace where I'm just collecting all of this information that I've got, where do I actually share the story? Well, I find, and you may find differently, but this is kind of my process. I find that if I write the story down first, it makes it easier to come up with those hooks and how I want to tell the story before I actually start sharing it. Some of you may want to do it the other way around. Some of you may want to try sharing it a few times and maybe even just grab a mobile device and record yourself sharing the story and then use that as the basis for the written version of your story. Once the story is written, or even as you're writing it, like I said, I like to do it kind of in that note space to keep that going. But when I'm ready to share the story publicly, you can come in here to the gallery. So I'm on Abraham's page. I'm going to click on gallery. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on create a story. And when I go to create that story, then I have an opportunity to do it a couple of different ways. I can do it visually and in as few words as possible. So that's one option for doing that. I can do it visually and in as few words as possible. That's really great if you're sharing a story with teenagers or small children. Um, that's kind of the world they live in. And so I can create a story that way. I can also create a document, and this is where I can like put in like the full story. It's just like writing into a Word doc or a Google Doc. I can put in a title, a date, and a place where the story took place, and then a short description of the story. And then I can just write that story to my heart's content. I find I kind of work on it in the notes, and then once I get it to a place where I want to refine it, I often will move it into a Google Doc, and then once I get that story where I want it, then I will just paste it in here. For me, I find that that works best. So discover those stories, discover what stories you want to tell, then dig into the information that you have about that person and see what else you can find, and then find ways to share that particular story. There are so many stories. I have spent the last year and a half. I have a podcast called Stories That Live in Us. You can watch that on YouTube. But this year we started in July. And we are telling a story from every one of the 50 states leading up to America 250 on July 4th, 2026. And sometimes I share my own stories. More often, I invite guests. Like I said, this season, we're doing a story for each state. So if you want some examples of how to share stories or how to craft stories that are worth listening to, I would recommend that you go listen to that podcast. Again, it's Stories That Live in Us, and you can find it on YouTube. But the idea is I created that because I wanted to model for people how to share those stories. And so I'm so excited that this year, in this 250th celebration year, that Ancestry is focused on the story of us. What are all of the stories that make up America and American history? And how do we make sure that all of those stories get told? Well, the fastest way to make sure all those stories get told is that if every one of us finds ways to tell our stories, the stories in our family tree. Some of you already have those stories. You've already done the research. You've already got all the information. You just haven't shared the story publicly. And so I would invite you in this year to join Ancestry and keep your eye on your inbox and join us at Roots Tech, either in person or virtually, so that you can find more ways and opportunities to share those stories of both the remarkable ancestors in your family tree and the ones who lived what at the time were probably pretty everyday, average, ordinary lives, but who were still probably pretty extraordinary in their own right. So as we sign off today, I just want to invite you again, in the chat or in the comments, if, as we've been talking, you've thought of a story you want to dig into more. Maybe it's a specific ancestor or a specific time and place. I would love if you would share that with us, because I would love to see what stories you're working on. And then maybe as we get more toward the anniversary in July, we can get back together and we can share some of those stories that we've managed to put together. We'll see if we can work on a way for us to do that. I am here every Wednesday at the same time, same place. You can find us at ancestry.com/education to see what the upcoming 3 weeks of topics are, to register to join us live, where we've got this really great, I'm watching the chat fly by and it's kind of amazing what's happening as you're sharing with each other. Or, of course, we do get these up about a week later onto YouTube, and you can watch us there. But I hope you'll join us every Wednesday. I've got some great things planned for us for educational opportunities throughout the year. But I hope that as we dig into the nitty-gritty over the year of how to use Ancestry and different features and tools and genealogical and family history best practices, I hope that you'll always keep in mind this idea that what we're really building is not just a family tree, but it's stories that connect us and stories that help build the fabric of, in this particular case, this country over the last 250 years. Until next time, I'm Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.